All right, let's do this. Into a topic a lot of you have been asking about, women in leadership.
Looking forward to it.
You guys sent over a ton of research on this, reports, articles, the whole deal. So we got to work really digging into it.
Yeah, there's some fascinating stuff in there.
Absolutely. I mean, I knew there were gaps, obviously, but some of the data is pretty shocking, like a global ranking of countries by gender equality. Who knew?
Right.
And then all these stories about incredible female entrepreneurs out there.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, get this, there's research linking leadership style, like masculine versus feminine traits, to how well a company handles a crisis. Who would have thought?
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And it's a huge topic, obviously. A truly global conversation happening right now.
Totally. So where do we even begin?
Well, luckily you sent over some really solid research to help us unpack it all. One of the most comprehensive is the 2024 Gender Equality in Governance Index. They call it the GEGI for short.
Yes, the GGI. That one was packed with info. But it's not just about, like, counting how many women are CEOs or in parliament, right? It goes deeper.
Much deeper. It's kind of like a global report card, you could say, on gender discrimination.
Okay, I like that. A report card.
Yeah, so they measure about 60 different variables across 158 countries.
Wow, 60 variables.
Yep, to see how each country is doing in 5 key areas.
Okay, lay it on me. What are the 5 areas?
So it's governance and equality, entrepreneurship, doing business. They actually separate those two, which is interesting. Then education, women, and work. And finally, violence against women.
So they're really looking at the whole picture, not just one slice of the pie.
Exactly.
So when you were going through all those numbers, what really stood out to you?
A lot of things, to be honest. But one thing that really struck me was how they measured doing business.
Okay, what do you mean?
So they don't just look at how many female entrepreneurs there are, which is important, of course, but they also look at things like inheritance laws and access to financial services for women. Turns out, those legal and economic frameworks, they have a massive impact on a woman's ability to actually start and grow a business.
Makes sense. I hadn't thought about it that way before. Okay, so big picture, where does the world stand overall? Were there any surprises in the country rankings?
Well, some things were predictable, but others were a bit more surprising. As you might expect, Europe is way ahead in terms of gender equality.
Yeah, I was going to guess that.
14 of the top 20 countries on the GEGI are EU members.
That strong social safety net probably helps. And those really generous parental leave policies they have over there, I'm betting that plays a role.
You know, you're absolutely right. The report actually links those policies to higher rates of women in leadership positions.
Makes sense, right?
When women have support in their personal lives, it frees them up to pursue those opportunities in their professional lives.
So it's not just about telling women to lean in, it's about creating systems that actually support them.
Right. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Afghanistan and Iran, they unfortunately have the lowest scores in the index.
Sadly, that's not a surprise given everything we're seeing in the news these days.
It is a stark reminder, though, isn't it, about how interconnected gender equality is with things like democratic freedoms.
Totally.
Actually, the report found a very strong correlation. The higher a country scores on democratic principles, the higher they tend to score on gender equality as well.
Well, yeah. If women have a voice in their government, it stands to reason they'll have more equitable opportunities overall, right? Speaking of opportunities, let's shift gears for a second. I have to tell you, I was blown away by some of the stories of these female entrepreneurs highlighted in the report. Talk about innovation.
Oh yeah, the entrepreneurship and doing business pillar is full of inspiring examples. It actually showcases this UN SDG challenge.
Oh yeah, right.
Where they feature female entrepreneurs who are tackling some of the world's biggest problems head on.
There's one story from Egypt I couldn't get out of my head. This woman created a company that turns agricultural waste into, get this, sustainable building materials.
Wow.
So she's not only tackling pollution, but she's also helping to solve the affordable housing crisis. Like, come on, that's incredible.
That's a phenomenal example. And it really showcases the potential, right? The incredible potential that women entrepreneurs have. But here's the thing. Even though she's clearly having this massive impact, the report talks about all the obstacles she faced just getting to this point.
Really? What kind of obstacles are we talking about?
Well, access to funding. That's a major issue for women entrepreneurs in Egypt and a lot of other regions. But it's more than that. It's the cultural norms.
Yeah.
It's often difficult for women to be taken seriously in business, you know. And there can be legal barriers, too, making it harder for them to get loans or even own property.
It's so frustrating. She's brilliant, she's driven, and she's still having to fight against a system that's like actively working against her. Is that experience common for other female entrepreneurs around the world, would you say?
Unfortunately, yes. Even in countries with more, progressive policies, the report shows that women are still less likely to get venture capital funding or even be approved for business loans compared to their male counterparts.
Ugh. It really shows how much work we still have to do.
It does.
It makes you wonder how many incredible innovations we're missing out on simply because we're not fully supporting women. It's like we need to change the whole system.
That's really what it comes down to. And that's really what this whole deep dive is about, right? Exploring those systems. Speaking of systems, let's move on to another big one, the global workplace. What did the GGI tell us about what women are up against on the job?
Okay, first of all, can I just say, even in 2025, I was shocked to read that only 53% of countries offer at least 14 weeks of paid maternity leave. That's it. That means there are millions of women out there who are basically forced to choose between their careers and caring for a newborn baby. It's mind-boggling.
It is. It's a reminder that these basic rights, even something like paid maternity leave, they're not guaranteed for every woman. And it doesn't stop there. The lack of affordable childcare
Don't even get me started.
is another massive barrier. And again, this disproportionately impacts women. It limits their ability to participate fully in the workforce.
It's almost like we're setting women up to fail. Like, how can you contribute your full potential if you can't afford childcare, or you're forced back to work just weeks after having a baby?
Right. It's a systemic problem. And the report highlights the economic consequences of this. Because when women can't fully participate, it holds them back, of course, but it also slows down overall economic growth.
Yeah, it seems pretty simple. Investing in women means investing in a stronger economy.
Exactly. And yet we're still dealing with the gender pay gap. Despite all the progress that's been made, women are still paid less than men for the same work in so many industries.
I know. It's like, how are we still talking about this in 2025? It's so frustrating.
Well, it's complicated, right? And it's important to remember that the pay gap isn't always about outright intentional discrimination.
I guess so.
Sometimes it's about unconscious bias or societal expectations about the kind of jobs women should have.
Right. It's not always malicious, but the impact is the same.
Exactly.
And again, it's not just about fairness, though. That's huge. It's about recognizing the economic value that women bring to the table. We are literally leaving money on the table by not empowering women in the workplace. I'm curious, have you seen any of this play out in your own career?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there are relating to this all too well.
Unfortunately, these are issues that resonate with so many of us. Now let's shift gears to something that's, well, unfortunately even more serious. The report also digs into the issue of violence against women.
Yeah, this is where it gets really heavy. Honestly, I was floored to learn that only 57% of countries actually have laws in place to protect women from domestic violence. We're talking 2024 here.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
That means almost half the world, women don't have any legal recourse if they're facing abuse in their own home.
And the data reveals a really clear pattern here. The report found that almost every full democracy has laws against domestic violence and sexual harassment, right? But only about half of authoritarian regimes have that kind of legislation.
Wow, so there's a direct connection there. Again, democratic freedoms and women's safety, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that we can't talk about gender equality without talking about basic human rights and political freedom.
Couldn't agree more. And the report goes on to highlight some specific cases, like Afghanistan and Iran, where women are facing just unimaginable levels of violence and oppression. Honestly, it's hard to even comprehend the courage it takes for those women just to exist in those environments.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that behind these statistics are real people. And it challenges us to ask some tough questions, right? About what allows this to continue, what allows these injustices to flourish, and what can we actually do to change it?
Huge questions, but so important to be asking. Now, there is some good news. Despite all these challenges, the report did offer some glimmers of hope. One thing that caught my eye was this concept of balancing masculine and feminine leadership qualities as a way to create more, resilient and inclusive workplaces. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting, right? It's an idea that's definitely gaining traction, and for good reason. A lot of research suggests that when leaders can blend these so-called masculine and feminine traits, you end up with a much more dynamic and effective leadership style.
So what do we actually mean when we say masculine versus feminine leadership? Not trying to reinforce stereotypes here.
No, of course not. It's about recognizing the strengths of different approaches. Traditionally masculine qualities would be things like, decisiveness, assertiveness, strategic thinking, that kind of thing.
Which are important, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But they're even more effective when they're balanced with, let's call them traditionally feminine qualities, like empathy, collaboration, intuition, strong relational skills.
So it's about finding that right mix, right, depending on the situation.
Exactly. Leaders who can do that, the research shows that they tend to make better decisions, build stronger teams, and just cultivate a more supportive environment overall.
Well, that makes sense. So I'm guessing the report gives some examples of leaders who are doing this well.
They do. One prominent example is Jacinda Ardern. Her leadership during her time as Prime Minister of New Zealand was remarkable. She really balanced that empathy and compassion, but also with really decisive action, especially during crises like the pandemic and the Christchurch mosque shootings.
Yeah, she was praised globally for her leadership. It's a great example of how blending those different approaches can lead to really effective leadership.
Absolutely. Another example is Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. He very deliberately shifted Microsoft's culture.
Oh, really?
Away from this, hyper-competitive, top-down approach to one that's much more collaborative and empathetic.
Interesting. And didn't they become even more innovative as a result?
Exactly. It's a perfect illustration of how, letting go of these rigid leadership stereotypes can really unlock potential for individuals and for entire organizations.
It makes you wonder why those qualities were ever separated in the first place. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more element of the GEGI report that I wanted to touch on, and that's the inclusion of environmental data.
Yeah, this is a really innovative addition to the 2024 index. It highlights the vital role that women play in climate governance and just environmental policy in general.
And the report specifically mentioned Estonia, Moldova, and Panama as being leaders in this area. What are they doing that others aren't?
Well, one thing is they're really good at including women in their delegations to the big UN climate conferences. And they're also intentional about factoring in gender considerations into their national climate action plans.
Which makes sense. I mean, if we're going to solve a massive global crisis like climate change, you got to have diverse perspectives at the table. But I'm curious, why might women's leadership be especially important when it comes to, environmental issues?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore more in the next part of our deep dive. There's actually a growing body of research that suggests women, they tend to be more concerned about environmental issues and more supportive of, sustainable policies.
That's interesting. I have seen some studies, showing that women are often more directly affected by things like deforestation or water scarcity, especially in developing countries. So it makes sense that they'd be more focused on those issues.
Right, exactly. And when women are in leadership positions, they're more likely to actually push for policies that benefit, both the environment and the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change.
So it's not just about having a seat at the table, it's about bringing a different perspective to the table, a different lived experience.
Absolutely. And that's why this decision by the GEGI to include this environmental data, it's actually really significant. It highlights that crucial link between gender equality and, environmental sustainability.
It really drives home the point that we can't solve one crisis without addressing the other, They're interconnected.
Precisely. And this brings us back to your earlier question, why might women's leadership be particularly important in actually tackling climate change? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, based on what we've talked about so far, it seems like women might be more likely to approach environmental issues with, maybe more of a focus on collaboration and long-term sustainability. Maybe it's because they're often the ones who are dealing with the consequences of, environmental damage more directly, so they have a greater sense of urgency.
I think you're onto something there. The report actually highlighted a few case studies of, women-led initiatives that are making a real difference in this fight against climate change. There's this one woman in India, for example, who's leading this incredible movement to plant millions of trees, and restore degraded land. And it's not just addressing climate change, she's also empowering women in these rural communities by giving them jobs and training.
Wow, that's amazing. So she's combining those, let's call them feminine leadership qualities like empathy and collaboration with a real, decisive, action-oriented approach. It's about getting stuff done.
Exactly. And her story, it's not unique. The report is full of examples like this, women who are really leading the charge on climate action. From those grassroots organizers to scientists, policymakers, you name it. It's clear that women are this driving force in this movement. And their leadership is, I think, absolutely essential if we're going to meet these, pretty massive challenges that climate change is throwing at us.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening, honestly. We've covered a lot of ground, from global rankings to what it's really like for women in the business world and the workplace, and then those really harsh realities of violence against women. And now this, the connection between gender equality and the environment. It's a lot to take in, but it's so clear these issues are all connected.
It's true. We've just scratched the surface here. It's such a multifaceted topic. But I think it is helpful to step back just for a second and think about what we've learned. What are some key takeaways that you're walking away with?
Well, one thing that really hit home for me is just the scale of the challenge. We see progress in some areas, but these massive disparities still exist. Women are still facing discrimination. They're facing these systemic barriers in, every aspect of their lives, from the boardroom to the courtroom, even to their own homes.
Yeah, and those disparities, they're often even worse in those authoritarian regimes where women have very limited, political and social freedoms. The data really makes it clear democratic principles and gender equality, they go hand in hand.
It's a reminder that this fight for gender equality is far from over, and we can't take those democratic institutions for granted.
Right. Another takeaway for me is just the resilience of women.
Oh.
Despite everything they're up against, they are leading groundbreaking businesses, they're driving social change, they're finding solutions to these global problems like climate change, as we just talked about.
Absolutely. I keep thinking back to those stories of the female entrepreneurs. So inspiring. They're not just breaking glass ceilings, they're creating entirely new systems, changing the way we think about business, about leadership, about everything.
And it's not just business, right?
Oh.
We see women leading the way in science, tech, politics, the arts, everywhere. It really is a testament to their talent, their determination, their commitment to making the world a better place.
And it makes you realize we're all losing out when we don't fully support women. Think of all the potential that we're wasting because of these barriers.
Exactly. And that's why we need to move beyond just celebrating those individual successes. We need to change the systems that are creating these inequalities in the first place. We need to advocate for policies that support women, support organizations that are doing that work, and really challenge those ingrained cultural norms that are holding women back.
Totally agree. I have a lot to think about after this deep dive. It's clear we all have a part to play in this. If we want to create a truly equitable world for women, we all have to do our part.
And this isn't just about women helping women, right?
Yep.
Men have a huge role to play in this as well.
Oh, absolutely. Men can be incredibly powerful allies and advocates for gender equality. They can challenge their own biases, promote women in their own workplaces, and share those caregiving responsibilities at home. Crew equality requires everyone to be on board.
Right. It's about recognizing that this isn't just a women's issue. It's a human issue. It affects all of us. When women thrive, everyone benefits.
I love that. It's not about taking anything away from men. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Exactly. And the research is there to back it up. Studies have shown that companies that are more gender diverse, they're more innovative, more profitable, and their employees are happier. Countries with greater gender equality, they tend to be more peaceful, more prosperous, just have higher levels of well-being overall.
The evidence is clear, right? Empowering women isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
It really is a win-win. And yet there's still so much resistance. We still hear those same tired arguments. Oh, women aren't suited for leadership, or that somehow promoting equality will disadvantage men. It's frustrating.
It is. But I think it's important to remember, change takes time. And it means challenging deeply held beliefs, assumptions. It's not easy.
And that's where education and open dialogue come in. We have to keep having these conversations. We have to keep sharing the data, keep showing people the evidence, and highlighting those positive impacts of gender equality.
This deep dive has definitely gotten me thinking and talking, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
Me too. And I hope it's inspired some action. Even small steps, they can make a difference.
So what can our listeners do? What are some concrete things they can do to actually support gender equality in their own lives?
Well, it could be as simple as mentoring a young woman in your field, or calling out sexist language when you hear it, choosing to support businesses owned by women. Those everyday choices can make a difference.
Great ideas. And for our male listeners out there specifically, how can they be better allies?
They can actively promote women's voices in meetings, sponsor women for leadership opportunities, advocate for policies that support, work-life balance, and of course, be active partners in those caregiving responsibilities at home.
All great suggestions. It really comes down to, like, being intentional, right? Making a conscious effort, challenging the status quo.
Exactly. And remember, this change doesn't happen overnight. It's a
Boy.
process. It takes sustained effort and a willingness to keep pushing, to keep challenging ourselves and the people around us.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given us all a lot to think about, and I hope it's inspired our listeners to keep digging into this topic. It's so important.
Me too. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder. Given all the really urgent global challenges we face, like climate change, economic inequality, political instability, why is empowering women not just a matter of fairness, but a strategic imperative for the future?
That's a really powerful question, and one that we'll definitely delve into more in the next part of our deep dive. That question really has been bouncing around in my head ever since you said it. It's like, we always frame gender equality as a moral issue, which of course it is, but the data is clear, right? Empowering women isn't just the right thing to do, it's actually the smart thing to do. For everyone, for the whole planet even.
It is. We have to start recognizing that these challenges we're facing today, you mentioned climate change, economic instability, even that political polarization we see everywhere. These are all complex, interconnected problems, and frankly, we're not going to solve them with the same old approaches. We need fresh perspectives, new solutions, and a real willingness to collaborate across those boundaries.
And you're saying that's where women come in.
Exactly. Think about it. Women bring a whole different set of skills to the table. They're often more collaborative, more empathetic, more focused on that long-term sustainability we're talking about.
Yeah.
And those are the exact qualities we need to be able to even navigate the complexity of the 21st century.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like we've been playing with half a deck this whole time. What could we accomplish if we actually tapped into the full potential of all genders? It's kind of mind-blowing.
Right. And the research backs it up. Time and again, we see that companies with more women in leadership are more profitable, more innovative. Countries with greater gender equality, their economies are stronger, and their citizens report higher levels of well-being. It's all connected.
It's not just about fairness, then. It's about recognizing the power women have economically and socially.
Exactly. It's about creating a future that's more just, more sustainable for absolutely everyone. When we empower women, we're creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive. It doesn't matter what gender you are.
Okay, that is a vision worth fighting for sure. I have to say this whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. Honestly, a little overwhelming at times just thinking about the scale of it all. But it's also given me hope.
I get that. It's a lot. The challenges are real and they're big. But there's so much we can do. Even those small everyday actions, they really can add up to make a difference.
So what do we do? Where do we go from here? What are some concrete steps our listeners can take in their own lives to support this?
Well, first, awareness.
Yeah.
We need to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
Learn about the issues, understand our own biases, we all have them, and then speak up when we see discrimination happening.
Yeah, we have to call it out when we see it. Okay, what else?
Then action. Find a young woman in your field and mentor her. Support those women-owned businesses. Put your money where your mouth is. Advocate for better policies, equal pay, parental leave, things like that.
Love that. Any other ideas? What about for our male listeners? What can they do to be better allies?
Well, men can be really proactive about amplifying women's voices. Like in meetings, make sure those women's ideas are heard. Sponsor women for those leadership opportunities. And of course, share those caregiving responsibilities at home. It makes a huge difference.
It really does. It all boils down to being intentional, making a conscious effort, not just accepting things the way they are.
You got it. And remember, this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. We're not going to reach perfect gender equality overnight.
Nope. It's a process. We have to be in it for the long haul.
Exactly. It takes that sustained effort and that willingness to keep learning, keep pushing for change.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. I hope it's done the same for everyone listening.
Me too. And if it's even sparked a little action out there, even better.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to break all this down for us. This has been so insightful.
It's been a pleasure. These conversations are always so enriching, and I appreciate your questions and perspectives.
And to all of you listening, thank you, as always, for sending us these thought-provoking sources. And for coming along with us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has challenged you, given you some new insights, and maybe even inspired you to get involved in this fight for a more equal world.
Don't forget, this fight, it's a collective effort. Every single action, no matter how small it might seem, it makes a difference.
So keep learning, keep pushing for change, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a brand new topic. Until then, thanks for listening.